The clinking of champagne flutes sounded like tiny, distant alarm bells. Each polite laugh, each murmur of synthetic praise, scraped against Naomi's nerves. She smoothed the dark green silk of her dress over her thigh for the 10th time. A useless gesture that did nothing to ground her. The ballroom was a gilded cage, and she was the exhibit. It had been a year of living a life that was a perfect, beautiful lie, and the architect of that lie was somewhere in this very room. She felt his presence before she saw him. It was a drop in the room's temperature, a sudden weight in the air that made the back of her neck prickle. Kwon Jin-woo, her husband, a man she had spoken to for a cumulative total of perhaps 4 hours. He stood near the arched windows overlooking the city, a statue carved from shadow and bespoke wool. He wasn't looking at her. He never looked at her in public. That was the first rule of their arrangement. Well, if it isn't Naomi Brooks, gracing us common folk with her presence. The voice was a familiar poison. Marcus. He slid into place beside her, his cologne a cheap, cloying assault compared to the clean, sharp scent of cedar and smoke she now associated with power. He looked her up and down, his smile a condescending curve. "Still flying solo, I see," he said, his eyes flicking pointedly to her bare left hand. "I figured a woman like you would have landed someone by now. Or at least gotten a ring for your troubles." Naomi's spine went rigid. She gave him a smile that felt like cracking glass. "My troubles are significantly fewer these days, Marcus. Funny how that works." He chuckled, a loud, obnoxious sound designed to draw attention. A few heads turned. "Oh, that's right. You're curating that new exhibit at the gallery. Playing with pretty things. I guess some women prefer a career to a commitment." His gaze was deliberately insulting. "I just always pictured you as the type who needed a man to take care of her." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, meant to remind her of the woman she had been when she was with him, uncertain, eager to please, easily wounded. He had thrived on her insecurity. He thought he was speaking to that same woman now. He had no idea who he was speaking to, or, more importantly, who was listening. Across the room, Jin-woo's head tilted a single, almost imperceptible degree. His conversation with a city councilman didn't pause, but his stillness became absolute. Predatory. Naomi felt the shift like a change in barometric pressure. The air grew thin. "I'm well taken care of," she said, her voice even. It was the truest thing she had ever said to him. Marcus laughed again, louder this time. "Sure you are. Look, Naomi, no hard feelings. I'm with Victoria now, you know her father, the shipping magnate? We're announcing our engagement next month. I just hate to see you still floundering." He gestured vaguely at her, at the exquisite dress, the curated elegance that he couldn't possibly comprehend. "Still no ring. It's a little sad, isn't it?" The humiliation was a hot flush on her skin. It wasn't just what he said, it was the public nature of it. The pitying glances from the people nearby. He was painting her as a discarded thing, an object of failure. And in his small, brutish world, an unmarried woman of her age was exactly that. She didn't need to look for Jin-woo. She could feel his gaze on her, a physical touch across the crowded space. It wasn't comforting. It was a summons, a question, an evaluation of the asset he had acquired. Naomi lifted her chin. She met Marcus's smug eyes and gave him the one thing he didn't expect. Nothing.
No anger. No tears.
No defense. Just a cool, empty silence that slid right off his ego. "Congratulations on your engagement, Marcus. I wish you both exactly what you deserve." She turned and walked away, her steps deliberate, her back straight. She didn't look back to see his confusion. She didn't look toward Jin-woo. She simply moved through the crowd, a ghost in a green dress, and made her way to the powder room. Her heart was a frantic bird against her ribs, but her hands were steady as she turned on the cold water. She stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her eyes were older, warier. This was the cost of her father's safety, the price of pulling her family out of a debt they could never have paid. A quiet ceremony in a sterile office, 2 signatures on a thick sheaf of papers, and a quiet, terrifying man who now owned her life. The marriage was a business transaction, a shield, and Marcus had just thrown a rock at it. A woman in a severe black suit entered the powder room, her movements silent and efficient. She didn't look at Naomi. She simply placed a small, folded napkin on the marble countertop. "Mr. Kwan requires your presence in the West drawing room," the woman said, her voice devoid of inflection. Then she was gone. The summons had come. That was the moment everything changed. The polite fiction of the evening was over. She was no longer a guest at a gala. She was property being called to account. She dried her hands, took a steadying breath, and went to meet her husband. The West drawing room was silent and cold, insulated from the party's cheerful noise. Jinwoo stood by the fireplace, though no fire was lit. The only light came from a single lamp, casting his face in sharp angles and deep shadows. The suit he wore was a shade of charcoal so dark it was nearly black, tailored with a precision that was both elegant and severe. He didn't turn as she entered. He knew it was her.
"Close the door," he said.
His voice was low, a quiet rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Naomi did as she was told. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing them in together. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with unspoken rules, with the vast and dangerous world he commanded. He finally turned to face her. His eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned her face, missing nothing. He wasn't looking for hurt or anger. He was looking for weakness, for cracks in the facade. "Report." It wasn't a question. It was a command. He wanted the data, uncolored by emotion. "His name is Marcus Vance," she began, her voice a little tight. "We were together for 2 years. The relationship ended badly 18 months ago. He is arrogant, insecure, and enjoys public displays of power." "I observed that," Jinwoo said, his tone clipped. "What did he say to you?" She repeated the conversation, word for word. She detailed his condescending tone, his pointed look at her hand, his loud pronouncements about his new fiancé. As she spoke, Jinwoo's expression remained a mask of cold neutrality. But she watched his hands. He straightened the cuff of his left sleeve, a gesture so small, so insignificant, yet the movement was surgical, deliberate. It was the only sign of the lethal tension coiling inside him. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. He walked to the window, his back to her, and looked out at the sprawling city lights. The city was his. Every glittering tower, every dark alley, fell under his influence. "He embarrassed you," Jinwoo stated. It was a flat declaration of fact. "It doesn't matter," Naomi said, forcing strength into her words. "It does," he countered, turning back to her. The look in his eyes was chilling. He did not just embarrass Naomi Brooks, the art curator. He publicly disrespected the wife of Kwon Jinwoo. He mocked my acquisition. He implied that what is mine is of such little value that it remains unclaimed. The possessiveness in his words should have terrified her. It did. But beneath the terror, a strange, unwelcome warmth flickered. For a year, she had been a ghost in his life, a name on a page. Now, for the first time, he was claiming her. Not as a woman, not as a partner, but as a part of his empire. And Kwon Jinwoo protected his empire with absolute finality. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You will no longer be staying at your apartment," he said, ignoring her question completely. "My driver will take you to the penthouse tonight. Your things will be collected tomorrow. You are a security risk while you live alone." "A security risk? Or a variable you can't control?" The words were out before she could stop them. His eyes narrowed. A flicker of something, surprise? Respect, crossed his features before it was gone. "The two are the same. You will stay where I can ensure your safety. And my privacy." This was the rehook. This was the cage closing. Her carefully maintained independence, the illusion that this marriage was only on paper, was dissolving. She was being drawn into the center of his world. A world of quiet violence and absolute control. "And Marcus?" she pressed. Jinwoo walked toward her, his presence consuming the space between them. He stopped so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that scent of cedar and cold, clean air. He looked down at her, his gaze intense, proprietary. "Mr. Vance has made himself a person of interest," he said softly. "And I am a man who deals with his interests personally. Do not concern yourself with him again." He said her name for the first time that night, and it sounded different from his lips. Not soft, but sharp, clear. A point of focus in a chaotic world. Naomi. The penthouse was a testament to its owner. A vast, minimalist space of glass, steel, and polished concrete overlooking the city from the sky. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a fortress, not a home. For the next few weeks, it was her prison.
She saw him rarely.
He left before she woke, returned long after she had retired to the guest suite he'd assigned her. Yet his presence was everywhere. In the silent efficiency of the staff. In the way no one ever met her eyes. In the faint scent of his cologne that clung to the air in the library. She was a ghost in his house now, just as she had been a ghost in his life. She spent her days at the gallery, throwing herself into her work. It was the only part of her life that still felt like her own. But even that was tainted. A black town car dropped her off and picked her up with unnerving punctuality. She knew she was being watched, protected, controlled. One afternoon, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Heard you moved. Upgrading, are we? I know you always had expensive taste. Let me know when you get tired of your new benefactor. We could have some fun." Bile rose in her throat. Before she could delete it, a hand reached over her shoulder and plucked the phone from her grasp. Jinwoo. He had come home early, moving with his customary silence. She hadn't even heard him enter the room. He read the message, his face impassive. His thumb moved with brutal efficiency, deleting the text, the contact, the entire call history. Then he handed the phone back to her. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The gesture was 1,000 things at once. A violation of her privacy, an act of sheer dominance, and, in a way she couldn't explain, a strange, disquieting form of protection. It was the first act of unexpected tenderness, if such a cold, controlling action could be called that. He was erasing a problem. He was erasing a man who had hurt her. That night, she found she couldn't sleep. She wandered into the library, a cavernous room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves she knew he never touched. They were for appearances. He was there, standing before the wall of glass, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "You should be asleep," he said without turning. "So should you," she countered, her voice bolder than she felt. He finally turned, his eyes shadowed with a weariness she had never seen before. It made him look almost human. "They think they can use a woman to control a man like me," he said, his voice low and rough. It wasn't directed at her, not really. He was speaking to a ghost in the room. They believe sentiment is a weakness they can exploit. Naomi stood frozen, realizing he was offering her a piece of himself. A sliver of his past. "Did they?" she asked softly. "Did they use someone against you?" His jaw tightened. He looked down into his glass. "There was someone before. Before this. Before I understood the rules. My enemies thought she was my weakness. They were wrong. But she paid the price for their mistake." He looked up, and his eyes were black holes in the dim light. "I do not make the same mistake twice, Naomi. That is why our arrangement is what it is. It is why you are a secret. It is to protect you." "From men like Marcus?" she asked. "From men like me," he corrected. And there it was. The wound. The failure he carried like a shroud. A woman he had failed to protect. A mistake he had sworn never to repeat. She was not his wife. She was his penance. She was the mistake he was determined to get right. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was a monster, a killer, a man who moved pieces on a board of blood and power. But in that moment, she saw the man behind the monster. The man who had lost someone and walled off his heart with steel and concrete. She could have run then. The next morning, she could have walked out of the gallery and never come back. She could have disappeared. The thought was a tempting, terrifying flicker of hope. But she stayed. She went back to the penthouse. It was a deliberate choice. She didn't know why she made it. She told herself it was survival. She told herself it was for her family's continued safety. But as she saw him standing there again that night, a solitary figure against the city lights, she knew she was lying to herself. She was staying for him. Her lie became brutally clear a week later. She'd found documents in his office, left carelessly on the desk. It wasn't a business deal her father had made. It was a surrender. Her father's logistics company was being used to move Jinwoo's illicit goods across the country. The company, her family's legacy, was now a cog in a criminal empire. Her marriage wasn't protection. It was collateral. If her father ever faltered, she would be the price. The betrayal was a cold knife in her gut. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to pack a bag and disappear. But where would she go? He would find her. And what would he do to her father? Her indecision was a fatal mistake. Marcus, it turned out, was not just arrogant. He was stupidly persistent. He couldn't accept that Naomi had moved on. He started digging, trying to find out who her new benefactor was. He must have stumbled onto something, a name, a connection to her father's company. He got too close to a truth he couldn't handle. The call came from an unknown number. It was Marcus, his voice tight with panic. Naomi, you have to help me. These guys, they think I work for you. Or for him. They're talking about the docks, about a shipment. Marcus, where are you? She demanded, her blood running cold. An alley off VC Street. They're coming back. The line went dead. She didn't think. She acted. She ran out of the gallery, ignoring her driver, and hailed a cab. She had to get him out. Not for his sake, but because he was a loose thread that could unravel everything. A loose thread that could get her father killed. The alley was dark and smelled of rain and garbage. Marcus was slumped against a brick wall, his face bruised. Two men in dark suits stood over him. They weren't Jinwoo's men. Their posture was wrong, too eager, too sloppy. Rivals. Look what we have here, one of them said, his eyes landing on Naomi. The girlfriend comes running. Naomi's mind raced. They thought she was just a girlfriend. A weakness. Jinwoo's words echoed in her head. I do not make the same mistake twice. Let him go, she said, her voice shaking only slightly. He doesn't know anything. He's a civilian. The man laughed. He knows enough. And now, so do you. You're going to be a message to Kwon Jinwoo. A message that his territory is no longer secure. He reached for her. In that split second, Naomi did something the woman from the gala never could have. She didn't scream. She didn't cower. She reached into her purse, her fingers closing around the heavy bronze paperweight she used at her desk. She lunged, not at the man reaching for her, but at the side mirror of their parked sedan, shattering it with a sickening crack. The sound was an explosion in the quiet alley. It was the distraction, the opening. Tires screeched at the end of the alley. A black sedan, identical to the one that drove her every day, slid to a stop, blocking the only exit. Jinwoo got out. He didn't run. He moved with a calm, lethal grace that was more terrifying than any frantic charge. The two men tensed, pulling weapons. They never had a chance to use them. The violence was brutally efficient, surgical. A blur of motion, the sickening thud of impact, a choked gasp. It was over in seconds. Both men were on the ground, unmoving. Jinwoo hadn't wasted a single movement. He stood in the aftermath, his suit immaculate, his breathing even. He looked at the shattered mirror, then at the paperweight in her hand, and finally, at her. He walked past the groaning form of Marcus and came to a stop in front of her. His hands came up not to strike, but to check. They roamed her arms, her shoulders, his touch firm and impersonal, searching for injury. His eyes were dark fire. I told myself, he began, his voice a raw, ragged thing she had never heard before, that keeping you close was a matter of security. A variable to be controlled. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the mask was gone. In its place was something raw and terrifyingly real. I was lying to myself. It wasn't a confession of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was an admission of a truth he had tried to deny. She wasn't just collateral. She wasn't just a contract. She had become something more. Something he could not control. The rivals, having failed to use her as a message, now saw her as the target. The next attack was not subtle. They came for her at the gallery, in broad daylight. It was no longer about territory. It was personal. They wanted to take from Jinwoo the one thing he had inadvertently allowed himself to care about. But this time, Naomi was ready. Living in Jinwoo's world had taught her to see the patterns, to notice the man watching from across the street, the van that passed twice. She called not the police, but the private number Jinwoo had given her for emergencies. "They're here," she said, her voice calm. "The gallery. 2 at the front, 1 in the back alley." She didn't hide. She didn't run. She walked to the front of the gallery and locked the doors, trapping herself inside with the threat. She was no longer a pawn in their game. She was a piece on the board. She was creating a kill box. It was a cold, calculated move, born of the darkness she had been forced to inhabit. She was using her own life as bait. When Jinwoo's men arrived, it was a silent, coordinated storm. The fight was over before it began. She watched from the window, detached, as they removed the bodies. When Jinwoo finally walked through the door, the front of the gallery was pristine again, as if nothing had happened. He came to her, his face a grim mask, but his eyes held the storm of the battle that had just taken place. He looked around the silent gallery, at the priceless art, and then at her, standing among it all, untouched. He reached out, and his fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. "You are my wife," he said. The words were the same as the ones in the contract, but the meaning had been reforged in violence and fear. It was no longer a business term. It was a claim, an absolute. It was a promise of lethal protection and a sentence of a life lived in the shadows. A cost had been paid. Marcus Vance disappeared. His company was absorbed by a competitor, his engagement was broken, and he vanished from the city's elite circles. Whether he was paid to leave or forced, Naomi never asked. He was a loose end, and Jinwoo did not permit loose ends. Naomi had accepted this. She had crossed a line, participating in this world, and there was no going back. She had traded her old life for this one, for him. That night, back in the sterile perfection of the penthouse, the city glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Naomi stood before the vast window, watching the endless flow of traffic. She felt him approach, his familiar silence a comfort now, not a threat. He stood behind her, his presence a solid wall at her back. He didn't speak. Then his hand came forward. He took her left hand, his touch cool and firm. He slid a simple, unadorned platinum band onto her 4th finger. It was heavy,
Solid.
cold against her skin. There was no proposal, no declaration of love, no promises of a future she couldn't even imagine. The ring wasn't a symbol of affection. It was a brand. It was a warning to the entire world that she belonged to Kwon Jinwoo. It was the final link in the chain that bound her to him. She looked at the cool metal circling her finger, then at their reflection in the dark glass. A queen and her dark king, ruling over a city of lights and shadows. It was not the life she had ever wanted. But as his hand gently covered hers, the weight of the ring feeling less like a cage and more like an anchor, she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it was the only life she would ever need.